Hi everybody, welcome to Line of the Week number 128, Motif Development Using Melodic Rhythms. This week's line is based on a chord progression that I wrote in the style typically found in jazz standards. But the ideas of motif development and resolving tension apply to all styles of music, all instruments. For example, I was listening to Keith Jarrett improvising over the classic standard Solar recently, and I was reminded how he was really effective at stating motifs clearly and then developing them like nobody else can develop motifs, really. And then I was listening to an entirely different style of music, and I was listening to Eddie Van Halen's solo on the tune Hang 'em High. And you can hear him repeating a motif over and over in that solo using the same rhythm, just different notes, which is a technique called variation. And he was using that, and it sounded great. And of course, in all classical music, with the exception of through composed pieces and avant-garde music where they're intentionally trying to use different techniques other than motif development, setting those aside, almost all classical music has to do with themes and motifs and motif development. So first, let's talk about the definitions of motif and motif development. What is a motif and what is motif development? The definitions I use are from my old Berkeley professor, Hal Crook, as they're reproduced in his book, How to Improvise. A motif is a small thematic unit of melody, roughly between 2 and 8 notes, consisting of a single idea or musical thought, similar to a short sentence in language, generally not longer than 2 bars unless written in cut time. That's the definition of motif. What is motif development? Motif development is defined as follows. Motif development occurs when at least one musical element of a motif is the same as or very similar to that of a previous motif, establishing continuity while the other musical elements change to create something new for the sake of interest. For a motif development to be successful or effective, that which is the same between the two ideas and that which is different must be obvious to the ear. We'll look at how these definitions are applied to the line of the week very shortly, a little later in this video. First, let's look at the chord progression and the accompanying chord scale so we're all on the same page. Here are the chords to the progression. The chords are C major to E7 to A7, to F major 7 to F minor 6 to D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. Here are the chord scales I use. I use the notes from the chord scales for two things. First, as a source of notes for improvising, and second, to determine tensions to use for comping. The chord scales are G pentatonic to F melodic minor to A half whole to C major to F melodic minor to C major to A flat melodic minor to G pentatonic. Here's the melodic rhythm I'm using this week. This motif is from Jerry Bergonzi's book, Volume 4, Melodic Rhythms, Used with Permission. Here's the line of the week with Guitar Pro backing track I use to make sure I'm getting the notes and the rhythm accurate. Let me say a few things about the line of the week. There are different ways you can analyze the way in which the motif is developed, but the following is one way to describe it. In measure 1, you've got the original motive. In measure 2, you have an extension of the original motive. In measure 3, you've got a variation of the original motive, which means you've got the same rhythm as the original motive, just different notes. In measure 4, you've got an eighth note extension of the variation that you find in measure 3. In measure 5, you've got a variation of the original motive. In measure 6, you've got another variation of the original motive. And in measure 7, you've got a fragmentation of the original motive and then an extension of the fragmentation. And then in measure 8, you've got further extension of measure 7. It's important to note that when you're actually improvising, you're not going to be identifying parts of your solo as being the original motive and then variations of the motive and extensions and fragments and so forth. These are just terms that you can think about and apply to your own solos, just like you did when you were learning about intervals in triads, or about eighth note rhythms versus quarter note rhythms, or anything basic to your improvisation. You had to break it down and think about it and practice it until you no longer really thought about it. And that's the goal that you want to use with this sort of material. And it's good to be able to improvise using the play rest approach, where you play eighth notes and then you rest, and then you play more eighth notes and then you rest, and then you play not only eighth notes, but you go to different levels and 16th notes and triplets and so forth. And that's very important. But I think ultimately what you want to be able to do is tell a story with your improvisation. And the way to really get there is to kind of, at least for me, is to break it down initially and practice it, and then try to get it into your playing so that it comes out naturally on the bandstand. So thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week.